Hello and welcome to the No Huddle Podcast. This is Hot Takes episode 2. We did episode 1 right after the Super Bowl. And yeah, we're now entering the painful part of the offseason. The draft is done. We get the schedule release in a few weeks. And then other than that, we just got to wait, which that's the worst part. Long summers, lots of reading training camp reports and OTA reports of all things. But we still have a little bit to enjoy this draft before we forget about it. So let's talk about it. This is Hot Takes for the entire offseason. So let's start with our very first take, which refers to the team that had hosted the draft in Pittsburgh, and that was that the Steelers won the draft. Again, I'm going to preface this before I get into the take. It is very hard to say a team won the draft based off of, just their draft class, and we haven't seen any of them take a snap. The only team I could say that has confidently lost the draft is the Rams because I just disagree with their philosophy. But with that being said, I really like this draft. It, on paper, looks like one hell of a class. Max Ionichor at 21 was someone I really, really liked out of the draft, and I thought that was a natural fit. And for the Steelers, I know they got jumped for Mekhi Lemon by the Eagles. Howie Roseman will do his Howie Roseman things. But if considering they got jumped for Mekhi Lemon, this is not a bad alternative at all. And we're going to talk about Jeremy Bernard, who they also got in the second round. He shows a ton of potential, Max Ionichor. He's shown flashes of just like really, really great tape. And I think people say he's raw just because he's had a lack of experience at tackle. He's mostly... Hell, he's inexperienced as a football player in general, but he's shown flashes, and he's not necessarily raw. Like, he doesn't have major issues that need time to develop, and he needs to sit on the bench and all that. No. He can come in, he can compete for that starting spot week 1, especially with Broderick Jones and that neck injury, and he can come in and be a day 1 impact starter. That's going to be like a general theme of why I like this draft class so much, is because there's so many guys that Pittsburgh got who can come in and create an impact on day 1. This is a team that probably because we're still waiting on Aaron Rodgers somehow, probably going to have a 42-year-old quarterback. So you don't have time to, this guy just needs a year. You don't have that luxury. There's no real plan for next year to have a quarterback either, unless this whole team completely bottoms out and you're going to be at the top of the draft next year. So you need guys who can come in, make an impact right now for this team to go to the playoffs. And Max Ionichor, and again, many of these guys are going to be guys who can do that. Another guy who can do that, round 2, Jeremy Bernard, not sure if I'm pronouncing his first name correctly, compares a lot to Robert Woods. He is a hell of a blocker, really versatile. You can put him really anywhere. Maybe not the X, but other than that, high floor guy, really high floor guy. His thing, and the reason why he went in round 2 was more due to his ceiling, but he's got great hands and he could block, which means he's going to be pretty good on the Steelers. Like, that is two things where I know it's not Arthur Smith, but it's still Steelers football where I don't know about needing to have receivers just make flashy plays, but if you need a solid player, Jeremy Bernard is that. Again, big comp to Robert Woods. For a Steelers team that in the past is really focused on the run, a team that could use physical players on the outside, I really like that pick. Only pick I didn't like was Drew Aller, and that's going to get to a separate point about Carson Beck a little bit later in the podcast, but I don't like spending a third-round pick on what is a bridge quarterback. I don't think Drew Aller is going to become the Steelers franchise quarterback at any point. He is not projected to be anything like that. So getting what is a bridge guy or an insurance plan for Aaron Rodgers with the 76th pick, I think that is a pick that's better spent elsewhere, but I digress. And then even like if you look at the rest of their draft, like Jennings Dunker is somebody they traded up for in the 4th round who can realistically start day 1 if they need him to. Eli Heinrich in the 7th round is a guy out of Navy, super fun player. He can also potentially make an impact. So a bunch of guys in this draft class who are ready to come in on day 1 and really fight for spots on this team, which, again, for the Steelers is huge. That is knowing your game plan. Not like the Rams, when you're this close to a championship, you spend a first-round pick on a quarterback. I digress. But yeah, really like the Steelers class. So again, with the caveat that you can't win the draft just like a month after the draft, and we've never seen any of these guys play, I like this draft class a lot, and I see where the take is coming from. This also comes from Max, separate part of his take. He says that the Giants draft terribly, and that he doesn't care how this draft looks out because he just doesn't have faith it's going to work. I know that this take sounds a little bit biased, but I understand where this take is coming from in the respect that this draft is getting a lot of comparisons to the Evan Neal, Kayvon Thibodeau disaster a few years ago, where you get a premier edge, you get a premier tackle, and it looks great, but it ends up going terribly. But I just really disagree with this take. I really like the guys they got. Maui Noah and Reese were two guys who many mock drafts had going in the top 3, If you look at a bunch of them, a bunch of them had Reese 2 and Maui Noah 3. So we know they're elite talents, like high first round grade, which in a draft where there were not really many of them, it was huge for them to get 2 of them in the top 10. And there were 2 guys that fell. Like, both guys can come in right away and be stalwarts on both fronts. And Arvo Reese in particular. My God, a modern defensive coordinator's dream. Like, if Kyle Hamilton is the modern do-it-all safety, you can really have him do anything on the field. If Nicky Manwarier is like that at the nickel corner spot, Arvo Reese can be that at the linebacker and edge spot. What Arvo Reese can do, man, he is a perfect chess piece for any defensive coordinator. It's going to be so much fun watching how Denard Wilson uses him, because he can cover really well because of his speed. Like, we see him in like man-to-man coverage, and he actually has some level of success, which again, as an edge rusher, is insane. And off the edge, man, he really does, like, he reminds me a lot of Micah, which pretty high praise to give. And for them to be able to get him at the 5th pick, I understand why they had to turn in the card, even though they had Brian Burns, Kevon Thibodeau, Abdul Carter still chilling on the team. If Arvo Reese is available, you just have to take him. That's a foundational piece for you to get, and I'm so excited to see how he shakes out. Another guy that got in this draft was Malachi Fields. Can 100% be their true X. Like, his ability to just, like, target the ball in the air and get it, it's really, really fun to watch. My main concern with him is his burst and really lack of acceleration. That is something that 100% can hamstring them. I'm thinking of, like, old Giants Kenny Golladay. That's sort of just a lack of speed. Yeah, you're great at targeting the ball in the air, but you can't get open to save your life. So that's something that's a bit of a gamble. We're going to have to see how that pans out. But if he can get a little bit of that burst, he has like everything else you can want. They also got Colton Hood, who looks really, really solid. I think he can come in and be a contributor on that side of the ball. Despite the Giants' like lack of success in the draft in their previous years, outside of 2024, I think this is a really solid class, and I think it's a little bit early to judge them, even though, yeah, it's the Giants. Okay, moving on to the next pick. This is we had 2 very opposed hot takes. We had one from Anish, who's actually my brother, saying that ChatGPT can make better picks than the Cardinals GM. And the opposite was that Jeremiah Love was an amazing pick at 3, also from Max. And in this respect, I'm going to have to agree with my brother on the Jeremiah Love pick. I have made my stance on that pretty clear. If you haven't seen it, you can go back to last week's podcast. But the cliff notes of it is, when you have the amount of holes on the roster that Arizona has, you don't spend the 3rd overall pick on a running back. Like, I get that they've had a big roster overhaul as far as their offensive line goes. Like, they of course have Paris Johnson Jr., and then they brought in Isaac Seumalo, and then they drafted Chase Bezantis in the 2nd round. But that Cardinals run game was just terrible last year, and a large part of that was just the blocking. The blocking was horrible. They couldn't block against blitzes in the pass game, or not even blitzes to begin with. Just rough. Really, really rough around the edges for them. So, I don't know. This Jeremiah Love pick, to me, it's been giving him the most guaranteed money of any running back in the league as a rookie. Like, I don't deny that Jeremiah Love is going to be a great running back. I think he looks awesome. But I don't see the vision of spending the 3rd overall pick on him. I really don't. For a team that needs so much, running back was just not the pick. And then addressing the next point of this, I think the Cardinals GM has taken a little bit of too much heat. I think a big part of why Arizona is viewed as such a trash can of a franchise has more to do than just him. Because if you look at his drafts, they haven't been all that bad. Going back to 2023, they got a couple of studs. Before, actually gave him quite a bit of starters. Like, if you look at their highlights, there were some solid players like Michael Wilson in the 3rd round. You go to Denzel Burke in the 5th, which is really solid. Both of them are starters. Michael Wilson looks like a potential star. Walter Nolan last year as their 1st round pick looked like he needs to be healthy, but he looked really good when he was out there. And 2026 is more of the same, like, ups and downs, where I really don't like the Jeremiah Love and Carson Beck pick, but I really like Proctor in the 4th round, or Caleb Proctor, the defensive tackle, and I really like Chase Bezantis in the 2nd. So Monty has had some ups and downs, to say the least, and it's a lot of just, like, solid players. Like I said, there's a lot of starters they've gotten in the draft, a lot of depth pieces. Most of their draft picks aren't just complete busts. They are guys who stay on the roster. They're guys who can stay as depth. They can stay as starters. It's just that they haven't found either the big quarterback or, like, a big ticket star in the last few years. And I think Walter Nolan could be that, again, if he can stay healthy, which a big concern for him out of college was his health, and that has looked to continue through his rookie year. So again, hopefully he can stay healthy. I think Jeremiah Love will be the potential star for them. Maybe Marvin Harrison develops into that. But he's overall been a very okay GM who struggles at quarterback, who's have really, really made him look worse. So if Arizona finds their quarterback next year, which we'll see about, I don't think Carson Beck's the guy, just a shot. I think his overall reputation as a GM could be a lot better because he's done a very solid job at getting, just solid players, good players who can come in and play. But he has struggled with finding stars. So we'll see how that pans out for them. And that's kind of like the Cardinals as a whole. They've been stuck in neutral for a very long time. And sort of the bottom has been falling out slowly. And I think that trend's going to continue. But the hope is that after 2027, we start to see it start to go back up again. Also, on a side note, I'm going to talk about Carson Beck here. That was really dumb. That has been a very widely criticized pick. And I am no different. Because Arizona is going for a quarterback next year. There's no world where Arizona doesn't go quarterback in the first round next year unless they give Jacoby Brissett a contract extension and he looks like, a god. But other than that, very, very rare, 1%, 0.0001% chance of that happening, they're going to go quarterback next year. So you've effectively spent the 65th pick, which is basically a second-round pick, very top of the third, on a quarterback who you have no plans of starting in the future, is dumb. 65th pick on a bridge quarterback is really dumb. What you do is you give Jacoby Brissett the contract extension that he wants, and you live with that for the year. Or you beg Jimmy Garoppolo to not retire, and you give him some money. You do not spend the 65th pick on Carson Beck. That was just dumb. That was flat out dumb. It's a pick where there might have been pressure from the ownership to get me a young quarterback? Because other than that, I have no logic as to why that pick is the case. It's such a weird thing because they went and think, okay, Jeremiah Love in the first, and we're going to get him a lineman. And then, what the hell, we're going to go quarterback. It made no sense. For a team that has so many holes, bridge quarterback was not the thing that they needed to fill. That's my take on that. So, can ChatGPT make better picks to the Cardinals, Jim? Probably not. And I think he's been a little bit overhated considering that he's had some really, solid draft classes. But if he doesn't start getting actual, major hits soon, he's going to be out of a job. And for the love of God, he needs to get his quarterback. Moving on, we got a take from CJ. The Broncos won the offseason. I think that this is a take that really does depend on your view of the Denver Broncos last year. If you believe the Broncos were a one-hit wonder, like the Washington Commanders 2 years ago, who we'll actually talk about a little bit later, then I think you are what you see this take and you go, what on earth is that? I cannot disagree. They made no changes. But if you're of the opinion, like I am, that Broncos team is just really freaking good and that they're going to be back next year and they're going to be an absolute threat in the AFC West again, then I can see some merits of this take. So I think, in my opinion, people forgot how good they were. I think Bo Nix getting injured in that divisional round game has really thrown some people off because that roster is unfreaking believable. And it's essentially now the same roster minus Dre Greenlaw, which I get as a Niners fan. I'm very grateful of that. But Dre was somebody who did not really fit with them, and he had his own injury struggles. But he had a really, really good game in the AFC Championship. Don't get me wrong. But he was somebody who didn't really fit with Denver, and they were able to re-sign Singleton, and they'll keep him and Stranad in. And then their biggest need by far was a true impact skill player on the offensive side of the ball. They needed somebody who they could just trust. Because don't get me wrong, Courtland Sutton's a great player. But Courtland Sutton disappeared for a large portion of that divisional round game until the end. And, of course, with Jared Stidham, the whole offense went to a halt. So they didn't have, their just go-to guy. And Jalen Waddle is going to absolutely be that. Jalen Waddle, for one, he has an amazing contract. His contract's a steal up till 2028, where I think he's only being paid less than $25 million a year. He's going to be really, really good with Bo Nix. We saw how good Bo Nix looked with Marvin Mims. Now you essentially are giving him a supercharged Marvin Mims, who is even faster, a much better route runner. He can just do so much with the freaking ball in his hands too. And it's going to make Bo's life a lot easier. It's going to make Davis Webb, who's now their OC, who they kept around. I can't emphasize how important that is. Keeping Davis Webb and his freaking brain in this team was huge. And it involved Sean Payne actually giving up his play calling duties, which I didn't know Sean Payne had that in him to let that ego go. But Davis Webb is going to be really good. I really, really like him. I think he'll be a head coach next year. Him staying around was really huge. And it was almost as big as keeping Jalen Waddle. And if you look at their draft, it was okay. I didn't have much of an opinion on it. couple reaches, couple nice picks. I like Jonah Coleman in the 4th round, considering that J.K. Dobbins, who they re-signed, doesn't have the greatest track record with staying healthy. I think that he'll come in, he'll get some touches, and hopefully keep J.K. Dobbins healthier for longer. I even liked Red Murdoch as the Mr. Relevant pick, but overall, I wasn't like a huge guy on their draft. So keeping Jalen Waddle, or getting Jalen Waddle, keeping Davis Webb, and for the most part, keeping the roster intact. If you think that's enough to win the offseason, then sure, I can see this take, but I think winning the offseason is a little bit much just because like most of their offseason was just keeping their guys. I don't know how I would feel about that. Like winning the offseason to me was like, even though it never worked out, it was like how the Bears completely like reshaped their roster and poured in a ton of money to like make their team look a lot better. That was like winning the offseason. But I don't know if you can call winning the offseason just keeping your roster intact and adding a player. I think that a team that's a lot closer to that is more like the Raiders, but the Raiders would have won the offseason had they pulled off the Max Crosby trade, but they didn't. But, they still get to, and they add a new head coach. They add 2 guys who can come in and compete for the starting quarterback gig, and Mendoza, of course, and Kirk Cousins. Like that is more synonymous to me to winning the offseason than what the Broncos did, if that makes sense. Okay, moving on. We got another take here. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name or pronounce the username, but their hot take was that they just somewhat liked the Niners draft class, and they gave it like a B-. Now, you might be hearing this and think, how is that a hot take? B- is like about the most average grade you can give. But if you look at Niners Twitter, if you look at just general consensus, it's a draft that is getting absolutely dragged through the mud. And I have to say, I agree with this person's take. I really do. Because the Niners draft addressed premium positions. Of course, they got a wide receiver, they got an edge rusher, they got a defensive tackle. They even got a potential quarterback to come in and compete. They addressed a lot of premium positions, and they got really, really good scheme fits. Like, all of the guys that they got perfectly fit the Niners brand. But they also just had some egregious reaches to go get those guys. So, all the guys they got do fit, but they all got drafted like about a round earlier than I would have wanted them to. The value for this draft was just completely not there. And even as I'm saying that, there's still some picks I actually thought were really good. Like Grayson Halton, the defensive tackle out of Oklahoma, is somebody who's going to come into the rotation like right away and is going to provide a huge impact. Dejon Stribling projects as like a bigger, faster Jawan Jennings, and he can come in and serve his role as like a wide receiver throughout this team. But again, especially when you look at Stribling, that's a perfect example where he is a perfect fit for the 49ers. But the value that they got him at was it was egregious. Getting him the 33rd pick. I know there were rumors of him going at 40, but my God, this is a guy that people thought could go in the 3rd round, maybe the 4th. So I can feel the pain of that, of like, okay, that's the thing that really drags the draft class down. And for me, more than Stribling, the 3rd round running back killed me. Getting Kalen Black with the 90th pick. If they use him, like, great. If we actually take CMC off the field, then why not? Kalen Black. We actually could use another running back, especially if one of CMC or Jordan James goes down. Then yeah, Kalen Black can be huge for this team. But if it's just, we're not using any other running back than CMC, then we could have used that 3rd round pick on a real impact player to go now. So we'll see with that. So yeah, I really agree with this take. As the draft as a whole, I somewhat like it, which is right around that B grade, which was what I would give B-. I just wished it looked a little different. It's amazing how just shuffling one of these picks would make it look so much better. Like, for example, if Chase Besantis went at 33 and the Niners addressed offensive line and then they got Stribling at 58, that would have been that would be a draft where I come in and I'm like, Niners ace the draft. Or if the Niners even kept Stribling at 33, but then they stayed at 58 and drafted Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, who the Niners desperately need safety, but they didn't address at all in the draft. If that happens, then I'm like, I come in, the Niners killed the draft. The Niners are awesome. Yeah, they reached on that receiver, but man, they got a stud at 58. So it's a lot of things where I'm just balancing that. It's amazing how just one of those picks going a little bit differently would have reshaped the class. And I think that's a testament to all of the guys they got were great scheme fits. It's just a matter of the value is just not there for me. All right, moving on to our next take. We have the Commanders are going to be a completely new team this year. So last year was supposed to be the Commanders add-on to 2024, where, they made the NFC Championship game, but they had just some terrible injuries and really, really bad roster construction. Like, their supposed all-in push was just getting even more old veterans for a team that was already the oldest team in the league with a 24-year-old quarterback. I did not get the premise behind it, and it didn't end up working out. So they completely overhauled their coaching staff. Both coordinators are gone, including Cliff Kingsbury, which was shocking. I think it was the right move, but I just didn't expect them to do it after how 2024 went, and the fact that Cliff was almost a head coach last year. But they also did go back at it in free agency. They dipped their hands in the free agency pool again, trying to make the most of Jaden Daniels' rookie contract. They got Odafe Owe, who they paid the absolute shit out of, like 4 years, $100 million. Considering he just had one second half of the year, that was a bit much, but I get it. Edge rushers are a desperate commodity in this league. They got a guy like Charles Menahu and Clavon Chason, who, for a team that had just absolutely no pass rush last year, love those guys. They got an incredibly underrated player, in my opinion, in Leo Chenal, who is going to come in and, again, just no more Bobby Wagner, which is great for them because, my God, he was one hell of a liability. They got even my favorite running back in this free agency class in Rachaad White, because he can come in and just be an absolute threat in the receiving game, in the pass blocking game. So, a lot to like about this free agency class, and minimal losses as well helps. I think the only guy they really lost in this class was like Jeremy McNichols, who was a solid running back too. Other than that, I looked at their free agency losses. I just didn't really see much. And then, of course, you look at the draft, and they got Sonny Styles and Antonio Williams, who are both guys that can come in and contribute day one in the draft. Sonny Styles in particular. There was a really cool story I heard about Sonny Styles. Credit to Brett Coleman. He was talking with Daniel Jeremiah on the Bootleg Football podcast before the draft. He was talking about how Sonny Styles was just such a pro. And considering the fact that he's like 21, 22 years old, he just had a certain demeanor about him. He answered questions really well, and he just seems like a really, really good dude. Like his teammates attested to that. And then, of course, you look at Sonny Styles on the field, and my God, there's a reason why a linebacker in the big 2026 went with the 7th overall pick, because what he can do on the field as a pure talent, he's like a top 3 player in this class. Like him, Jeremiah Love, and maybe one of the tackles. Like that is what he can do is impressive. Of course, he has that insane top end speed that even his brother has. Lorenzo Styles ran like 4.23, but Sonny Styles has incredible speed at the linebacker spot. And every time you see a safety convert to linebacker and they look good, you think of Fred Warner, because that's what he did at BYU. Former safety, moved to linebacker, and now you get a linebacker who is incredibly rangy and physical, fast as hell, can guard any receiver. And the vision is that Sonny Styles can be that. So if you want to talk about a Commanders team that had just a terrible defense, needed a big shakeup, Sonny Styles can lead that shakeup going forward. He can be the anchor of this team, which going from Bobby Wagner to Sonny Styles, I cannot emphasize how much of an improvement that is. You go from literally the slowest linebacker in the league to the fastest. That's going to be big. That's going to be really, really big for Washington. And I think, going back to the take here, I think completely new is a bit much, all things considered. If completely new implies that they're going to be back to where they were 2 years ago and back to the NFC Championship game, I will push back on that pretty strongly. But all things considered, it's a division that's full of playoff adjacent teams, maybe outside of the Giants. And I very much can see Washington in that group. Like, they can be competing with a Philadelphia and a Dallas this year. And do I likely think they're going to slot in that third spot? Yeah. But it's a team that's going to have a significantly more success than last year, of course, if Jaden stays healthy. Moving on. We got the last take here, which is that this is a long one, so give me a second. Aaron Glenn isn't a bad coach. He just got put in a bad situation. And he got 0 picks, but the Jets had plenty of opportunities to pick the ball. And at some points, you got to stop blaming the coach and start blaming the players. He can't just scheme players to pick the ball. You got to just get lucky with a bad ball or a really good DB. And unfortunately, the Jets didn't have exactly the best DBs. Okay, so let's start with the middle part of this, which is you got to get lucky or with a bad ball, or the Jets just can't catch the ball. According to ESPN, the Jets only had 2 dropped interceptions. So it wasn't a case of necessarily, they just dropped a ton of them, so this interception stat's overblown. No, the fact that they only had 2 dropped interceptions, like even if you catch both of them, I'm curious to Google the interception ranks in the NFL last year. I'm pretty sure 2 still puts them at dead last. Yeah, as I'm pulling it up, the Cowboys had 6 interceptions, which put them at second to last. And they were tied with the Titans and the 49ers. So even if you caught 2 of them, you still would have been last by a considerable margin. And the Jets having bad DBs was mostly self-inflicted. You go back to a little over a year ago, this is a team that had Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed as their starting defensive backs, which, especially at the time, was really, really good. DJ Reed was a hell of a freaking cornerback for the Jets. And in theory, you put him with Aaron Glenn, who likes his man-to-man coverage. DJ Reed's amazing in man-to-man. It was a pretty perfect marriage, but they couldn't keep him around. He signed with the Lions. And now it's a team that I can't even name their starting cornerbacks. It's Brandon Stevens and who else? Because you signed Brandon Stevens for a big contract for some reason. And I think, looking at this take, I think the Jets have had a terrible roster, which absolutely they did, my God, and terrible coaching. Both can be true. Aaron Glenn had to fire half of his goddamn staff or more. The entire Jets' whole freaking coaching staff got wiped. So if you want to argue just the roster was terrible, you can't blame it on the coaches. Why did Aaron Glenn himself fire almost all of the goddamn coaches? And do you have any faith in Aaron Glenn picking the right staff to get them back? Like last year, hiring Steve Wilks as your defensive coordinator, I could have told you that would have been terrible. I think the average fan could have told you that would have been terrible. And guess what? He got fired midway through the season because they allowed like 36 points in a game and then like 48 points in a game. So, I don't know. Maybe don't hire the guy who is obviously going to be terrible. And now, like, they hired Frank Reich as their OC, who is a name I haven't heard in a little bit of time, to say the least. Frank Reich was really good like a while ago. But you look at him and the success or lack of success he had in Indianapolis, a large part of it was due to the fact that he didn't know how to adapt to modern defenses. He really struggled with it. And now you're looking at like, my God, you see what Seattle's doing with Mike McDonald. That's going to be a whole nother freaking can of worms for him to figure out. He's already still struggling with the old gen. We're up to new gen now. Do I trust Frank Reich to figure that out with this Jets team when his quarterback is Geno Smith? No. No, I don't. So I just don't see the Jets being much better next year. And I think midseason, what everybody's expecting is midseason, Woody Johnson's going to pull the trigger and Aaron Glenn's gone. And in that respect, if that's inevitable, which I think it is, then again, even though I am not a big proponent of firing coaches after 1 year, I think I've seen enough. I think it's enough to let him go. Like, the Jets draft was solid. I like, considering the freaking insane draft capital they had, I liked Pons and I liked Omar Cooper. Of course, I would have gone with Arvo Reese and Mekhi Lemon instead of David Bailey and Kenyon Sadiq, but I get those picks. Like, those are players who are going to come in and be really good. Maybe outside of Kenyon Sadiq, I have a few issues with him, especially in run blocking. Yeesh. But I just don't see it with Aaron Glenn. I don't think he gives you enough on defense to justify keeping him around. I know he's going to call the plays next year. God knows how that goes. Really, I just don't get it. And looking at the interception thing is not a thing to just gloss over. Like, I know he got 0 interceptions, but since that was tracked since 1933, a real thing on the Rich Eisen podcast, this was 3 months ago when they were talking about this, when the Jets had just finished up their season, which is the things that were invented in 1933. Again, historical precedent here. FM radio, amphetamines, and the game Monopoly. So the Jets had pulled something off which had never happened since the stat was tracked in 1933. That was 1933. It is unbelievable. What the Jets did last year, again, not a big guy on firing coaches in the first year. But I think I had seen more than enough. He did a terrible job picking his staff. He had done a terrible, god-awful job coaching the Jets last year. So I don't know what about that inspires the confidence to keep him around, especially when, if we were heading into this draft, this is a perfect spot to reset again. Like, I know, again, it sucks. You don't want to fire the coach. But when the Jets are good, like, they're going to finish the next 2 years with 6 first-round picks in total. And it would be really, really unfortunate to have to cut those in half between 2 separate regimes. I would much rather have, like, gone into this coaching cycle with Aaron Glenn gone, and then you can go to any team and be like, hey, we have 5 first-round picks in the next 2 drafts. I understand we're the Jets. I don't get me wrong. I get that. Like, you go to Clint Kubiak last offseason, and you tell him, hey, I got 5 first-round picks for you to work with. I don't know if he signs with the Raiders, even though he likes Mendoza a lot. Like, that prospect would have been so enticing for him to give up, so enticing for him. And I know Flores didn't end up signing with any team, but if you want to talk about, in my opinion, somebody who can just be a much better version of Aaron Glenn because he gives you something so unique on that side of the ball, you tell him, hey, 5 first-round picks if you leave Minnesota. My God. I think Flores does it. It is just a thing where I just don't get what Aaron Glenn gives you. In my opinion, I've had this take on the podcast multiple times, and it's been a while since I've said it, so I'll restate it. A coach can be 2 things. It should not be anything else. It should either be a mastermind of scheme on one side of the ball that gives you a clear and distinct either edge, style, or something like that, or it should just be an absolute, like, leader of men and a master of that. Like Dan Campbell, of course, he doesn't give you what you have in terms of like, one side of the ball, but you get, somebody who can just absolutely rally any of his players, and you get a true leader of men. This has always been my take with Sirianni, is that he doesn't do either well. He doesn't lead his men at all. My God, the Eagles locker room is always terrible. And of course, he's not really a genius on either side of the ball. But like Aaron Glenn, I don't think he does a good job rallying the Jets. The Jets locker room was a freaking mess last year. And I don't think he's good enough on the defensive side of the ball or has a unique enough style to where that would justify keeping him around. A lot of yapping for me from what was a long take, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate you sending in. I appreciate this take so much because it was a long take. It was really fun to respond to this, but I just could not disagree more. I think Aaron Glenn should have been gone, and I think it's a combination of the Jets having a terrible roster and terrible coaching. Both can be true. So, long take to end it. I apologize. But I hope you guys all had a ton of fun listening to the show. I know I had a ton of fun writing it. I know it took a while for me to respond to all these takes, but that's because I was researching a ton for them. This whole podcast took quite a while to prepare for. But I want to thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you guys all have an amazing rest of your day.